Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the learning of Torah Hashem, sponsored by Shalom Fogeli and Nishmas Yaakov Zeb ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas Gad, and Yosef ben Sion ben Yaakov Zev, by Baruch Ian, Lili Nishmas Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther Bas Yona, Avram ben Shmuel HaKohen, by Yaakov Yemansky, with a Korsa Tov to the Rav, the Zoom family, Nachas from children and grandchildren, A.B. Spry with Nachas from children and grandchildren, Ed Salah from London, and Joshua Rosenberg, a virtual Talmud. We're holding by Lamemra 4 lines from the bottom of Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. 4 lines from the bottom of Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. So the Gemara says, Lamemra, do you mean to imply the Sava Rav Nachman, that Rav Nachman holds Milsa de Isa Babari, the rules that are by a gift of a healthy person, Isa B'Shchiv Meira, is the same as the rules of a deathbed bequest. The Lesa Babari, that which is not by a healthy person, is also Leisa B'Shchiv Meira, is also not by a deathbed bequest. In other words, are all the rules the same? Amar Rav Nachman. Rava says in the very same Rav Nachman that Shchiv Meira she'amar tnu halva asi leploni. Chatzkel is a dying man, and he says, give this loan to Marshall. Somebody owes me money, give it to Marshall. Halva asi leploni. Marshall gets it, even though there's no note. It was only an oral loan. What happened was Yitzi owed Chatzkel money, and he said that loan should be given to Marshall. So the din is halva'asa l'pleini, it's granted to Marshall. V'afal gav d'leisa b'bari, even though that's not possible by a healthy person. If Chatzkel is a healthy person, he can't transfer an oral loan from Yitzi to Marshall. There's no way to do that. He could transfer a note, but he can't transfer an oral loan. So we'll see. Now, so the Gemara says, so there must be that Rav Nachman holds that which can't be done by a healthy person can be done by a deathbed request. So Rav Papa says, well, since a deathbed bequest, which takes effect after he dies, is tantamount to Yerusha. It's like we're making him a new Yoresh. Now, since by Yerusha, a father does transmit in inheritance to his son loans that are owed to him, even oral loans. So, Papa Amar Hoyel v'Yoresh, since a Yoresh is Yarsha, since a son would be Yoresh the oral loan, and the Matna Shchiv Meira makes him as if he's a Yoresh, so therefore that's why it's effective. Comes along Rav Acha B'rei Ravika, and he says, well, it does work by a healthy person. Like Rabbi Kran said, it's called Shibuda de Rav Nasin. Says the Gemara, Rav Acha B'rei Ravika Amar Halva Isa Babari. You could transfer a loan to a healthy person. Ukid Rav Hun Amar Rav, like Rav Hun the name of Rav. The Amar Rav Hun Amar Rav, Mana Li B'Yadcha. Rav Chatzkel says to Yitzi, the $100 of mine that you have, Teneu Leplani, give it to Marshall. B'mamad Shloshtem, in the presence of all 3, Kana. So therefore, since there's a method that it can be done by a healthy person, that's why it works with a Shchiv Meira.
That's not the same thing as Shibuda de Rav Nasan, is it?
Yes, it is.
It really is?
Yeah. Shibuda Rav Nasan means that if I say I have something by you, give it to so-and-so, That's Shibud Rav Nassan.
My understanding of Shibud Rav Nassan is it takes place automatically.
No, it doesn't take place automatically. Ibayalo says the Gemara, because if there's different achrayas, different responsibilities, it doesn't happen automatically. It's not the time for that. Now, Ibayalo. Now here, the Gemara starts looking into very interesting situations. Remember, we said that you cannot give over something that's not tangible. So now, what happens in the following case? Ibayalo, deka le'echad. I'm giving the palm tree to Shelley. Upeiroisav la'acher. But it's fruit to Marshall. Now the fruit isn't here yet. So didn't we say that you can't give away something intangible? But the question is, do we mean to say that I'm granting the palm tree its beautiful shade to Shelley, but I'm reserving the place in the palm tree that the fruit comes from to go to Marshall. And then I am giving him something tangible. So I'm giving him the source of where the fruit is coming from. Do we say, Mi Shayir Mokam Peirei? When I give the grant, am I reserving the place of the fruit for Marshall? Oiloi Shayir. Says the Gemara, Im Tim Tzalema La'achar Loi Havei Shir, that if I gave the palm tree to Shelley, and I give the fruit to Marshall, I gave the whole palm tree to Shelley, I can't give Marshall the fruit because it's not a tangible, it didn't come into the world yet. So what about la'atzmai? What about if I say I'm giving the tree to Shelley, except I'm keeping the fruit for myself? When it comes to me, do we say that I left the place of the fruit? Chutz mipeiros of mahu. What if I say I'm giving the tree to Shelley, except the fruit? Do I mean except where the place where the fruit comes from? So Amar Rava, Amar Ram Nachman, Im timtzalai medech galecha the peiros alachar. If he says the palm tree to Shelley and the fruit to Marshall, lo yavi shiur, he's not reserving for Shelley for Marshall the place of the fruit, and therefore Marshall won't get anything. But when it comes to himself, if he says lo yavi shiur makam peri, but if he says deka le'echad, I'm giving the palm tree to Shelley, the shaya peiros of the fun but keeping the fruit for myself, there I am keeping the place of the fruit. Shaya makam peri, there I am keeping the place of the fruit. My timer, why? Because kol legabei nafshei, when it pertains to myself, ba'ayin yofa mishaya, then I'm more generous, and I keep the place of the fruit. Now the Gemara switches the venue here. The Gemara says that this discussion was said referring to a different case. Amalei Rav Abba Rav Ashi. Anana de Rab Shimon ben Lakish masninullah. We taught this on a teaching of Rab Shimon ben Lakish. It's interesting because this is mamish what we learned today in the Mishnah Yomis. Mamish, it's referenced in today's Mishnah Yomis. If I sell a house to Shelley, and I say to him, I reserve for myself the rooftop. Now, we said that you don't have to say you're reserving yourself the rooftop, because we said if it has a parapet of 10 tvachim, or according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it has a Tzuras HaPesach, you don't sell that. So why do I have to say Almanas Shedyuta Elyana Shali? So earlier in the Masechta, Rav Zvid said that my Yiter Lashon of saying on the condition that the upper story is mine is that I'm not only reserving the roof, but although I sold you the house and the courtyard, I'm reserving the right to project things over the courtyard. So therefore, Dyuta Elyana Shalai, with the right to project things over the courtyard. Kibayalo. So now the Gemara says, Bayis le'echad, I'm selling the house to Shelley, v'diyuta la'acha, and the roof to Marshall. Now, do we say that he also allows Marshall to project things out from the roof? Mi ave shir oloi. Now, imtim tzolay mebayis le'echad u'diyuta la'acha, that when he gives the house to Shelley and the roof to Marshall, loy have shir, he doesn't grant Marshall also the right to project things over the roof, over the courtyard. Chutz midiyaitam. What about if he says here, the house is yours, Shelley, except for the roof? Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, imtim tzolay mebayis le'echad u'diyuta le'echad, where he gives the house to Shelley and the roof to Marshall. Lo have shir, he doesn't reserve for Marshall the right to project things over the courtyard. Chutz midiyuta have shir, except for the roof, there have shir. And of course, this is going according to Rav Zvid that says that if he wants to project things over the courtyard, he could. So we see why. Because when it comes to yourself, a person is more generous. Alma Kevin the Shire, the Yuta, since he reserves for himself the roof, Makam Zizan Nami Shire, because when it comes to a person himself, he reserves in a generous way. Now, this gets tricky. Remember, just want to remind you of the rules that when a dying man gives away everything, if he gets better, he gets to get everything back. Because we say nobody leaves himself with nothing. He only gave it away because he thought he was going to die. But if he gave away only something, then even if he gets better, the gift is binding, since he kept something for himself. Now the Gemara is going to talk about what if he gave away piecemeal. He gave away a part, and then he gave away the rest. Do we look at it, well, he gave away everything, so if he gets better, he gets everything back? Or do we say, since initially he gave away only a portion, that portion that he gave away, where he didn't give away everything at the time, even if he gets better, that portion still is a gift? So let's see, the Gemara is going to talk about different variations of this. Amar Rav Yosef Aminumi, Amar Rav Nachman. Shchiv meirahir chatzkel, shekosav kol nechosav lacherim. Chatzkel wrote everything to Marshall. So now it depends. Royan, we observe, imbe mechalek, if, says the Gemara, if he was doling everything out, it says the house to Marshall, the stable to Shelley, the country home to Ruvain, right? So it was clear that he was doling everything out in one shot. Meis kanukulan. If he dies, then everybody gets it. Amad, if he gets better, since he gave away everything, so chayzer bekulan, he gets it all back. Im b'nimlach, but if it looks like he changed his mind, meaning he said, I'm giving the house to Marshall. And then later he says, you know what? I'll give the stable to Ruvain and the country home to Shelley. Im b'nimlach, now, Mace, if he dies, they all get it. Kanakula. Ahmad, but if he got better, since he didn't do it in one sitting and give it all out, so when he gave the house to Marshall, he had the other stuff left. So that's not a matna shchimera. The only thing that was matna shchimera is the last thing that he gave to Reuven. Einoi chayzer ela ba'achron. Can only back out of the last thing. Says the Gemara, but who says? Maybe it was all a deathbed bequest, and he was thinking. That's why it wasn't all in one shot. Marshal the house. You know, Ruvain the country home. Shelley the stable. But maybe it was all one long gift. He was just trying to figure it out, but it was all one deathbed bequest, so he was giving away everything. So the Gemara says that's not the way people do a deathbed bequest. They make the calculation before they start talking. So then when they talk, it's not piecemeal. He figures out what he's going to give. And therefore the haltingness and the breaking it up is not because he was thinking, it's because he changed his mind. Now, Amar Rav Acha bar Minyumi, Amar Rav Nachman. Shkimei Rashi kosav kol nechosav lachera. Here, Chatzkel writes everything to Chatzkel. Chatzkel writes everything to Marshall. Everything. Lock, stock, and barrel. No. The Amad. And then it gets better. So we would think he gets it back. He wrote everything to Marshall. You should surely get it back. Says the Gemara, Eina Chayzer. He can't get it back. Why not? And we say that, yeah, but maybe that's not everything. Maybe he has a summer home in Nantucket or in Topeka, Kansas. And then he didn't give away everything. Says the Gemara, but it doesn't say that in the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, if he didn't leave anything over, then if he gets better, it doesn't go through. Why don't we say, but maybe he has a house in Nantucket? So Rav Chama says, there he said, I give Marshall everything. So there he said everything. Rav Chama, ba'omer kol nichsai. Where he says, I'm giving him everything. No. Even if he just said that I'm giving what is known to be his property, if you know that this person doesn't have anything else, he's not a country guy, he doesn't have anything in the Catskills, he doesn't travel to Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't have anything to Eretz Yisrael. When we said the din that if he gives away everything, he doesn't get it back, that's where he was well-traveled, and there's a very good chance that he had other properties in Israel and in London. There, we don't say, unless we do an investigation, that when he gets better, he gets it back, because maybe he didn't give away all his property. Now comes an interesting thing. Put on your thinking cap for this, Rabbi say. The dying man, Chatzkel, gives everything to Marshall. And then he says, you know what, I'm giving my house in Staten Island to Baruch Ian. The question is, that means he's reneging on giving everything to Marshall. He said, I'm giving everything to Marshall. Then he says, you know what? I'm giving my house in Staten Island to Baruch Ian. Do we say, but everything else is to Marshall? Or do we say he reneged on everything? Marshall's history. I know Marshall doesn't like that. Or do we say that, I mean, we would think that he just backed out of the house in Staten Island, but Marshall gets everything else? Or do we say that since he backed down on everything to Marshall, Marshall gets nothing? So let's see this inside. Ibayalu, chayzeres b'miktas, where he backs out of part. Have a chazara b'kula. Is he backing out of everything? Oiloi. So Tajma, Kulan Larishan, everything to Marshall. And then he says, Umiksasan L'Shain. Then he says, the house in Staten Island to Baruch. Shani Kana, Baruch gets Rishon Loikana. Now that sounds that it means that he's backing out of what he said to Marshall. Right? My lab b'shemeis. Isn't it talking about where he died? So since he died, he backed out of Marshall. Baruch gets the house, and there was something left because he backed out entirely from Marshall. So therefore, that's why Baruch gets it. Marshall doesn't get it. Says Gemara, Loi b'she amad. It's talking about where he gets better. Now, where he gets better, so as I explained, now, the question is, where he gets better, why do we say that Baruch gets it and Marshall doesn't? If Marshall gets everything except for the house in Staten Island, then it means he gave away everything. Because he gave the rest besides the house to Marshall, and then the house to Baruch. So he gave away everything. Now if he gets better, everything should come back. So, but first the Gemara wants to say that this case is talking about where he got better. Because Hachinami Mistabra, Midiktani Seifa, Miksasan Larishan, if he gave part to Shelley, he gave Shelley the house in the Catskills. Vikulan L'Sheni, he gave the house in the Catskills to Marshall, and he gave, here it doesn't mean everything. It means, and he gave the rest to Baruch. Rishon Kana, Shelley gets the house in the Catskills. Shani Loy Kana, Baruch doesn't get the rest. So Amad, we got better. And where he got better, it's talking about Mishamachi Sheni Loikana, because when he gave to Baruch, that's everything. And everything doesn't, if he gets better, it has to come back. Eli'i Amrit B'Shemeis, but if he gave the house to Shelley in the Catskills, and then he gave everything else to Baruch, and he died, so then why shouldn't Baruch get it? Travayu Likni. Says the Gemara, but even if it means when he gets better, if he gave in one, without changing his mind, he gave the house to Shelley and the rest to Baruch, when he gets better, nobody should get it. If you say that retracting part of it is retraction of everything, so then in the case of the Reisha, what was the case of the Reisha? Where he said to he was giving everything to Shelley, excuse me, everything to Marshall, that's how I said it, everything to Marshall, and then he says, no, I want the house in Staten Island to go to Baruch. So if we say that when he says the house in Staten Island to go to Baruch, he's backing out to everything for Marshall, that's why Marshall, that's why Baruch gets the house in Staten Island. Because he told, Chatzkel told Marshall, you have everything. And then he said, Baruch, you're getting the house in Staten Island. If we say that when he tells Baruch that you're getting a house in Staten Island, he's chayzer from everything for Marshall. Marshall gets nothing. So then even if he gets better, Baruch gets the house in Staten Island because he didn't give away everything. He kept everything else for himself. Hainu d'sheni miyaskana. But if we say that retracting part, when he said, Shelley, Marshall, you get everything. And then he said, Baruch, you get the house in Staten Island. But Marshall gets to keep everything else. So then if he gets better, nobody should get anything. That's a case where he gives away everything. And even Baruch should not get the house in Staten Island. Right? Because in that case, again, let's review what happened. He gave everything to Marshall. Then he says, no, I want to give the house to Baruch. If we say that the chazara of the house is a chazara bekula, and Marshall gets nothing, so then that's why if he gets better, Baruch still gets the house, because the Chatzkel keeps everything else for himself. But if we say chazara mixes lo yavi chazara, and when he says Shelley gets, Marshall gets everything, and then he says Baruch gets the house, it means that Baruch gets the house, but Marshall gets everything else. Then if he gets better, since he gave away everything, then it should all come back and nobody should get anything. Even Baruch shouldn't get anything. The Hilchasa, the law is, Chazar v'mixes have a Chazar b'kula. If he says everything to Marshall and then he says the house to Baruch, he's backing out of what he said to Marshall. And therefore, Reisha mishkachas la bein shemeis bein she'amad. The din in the Reisha, where he says everything to Marshall, and then he says the house to Baruch. So he backed out of Marshall. Whether Chatzkel dies or gets better, Baruch gets it, Marshall gets nothing. So that's The Reish is both where he got better or where he died. Seifa, now what's the case of the Seifa? The case of the Seifa is where he says he's giving the house to Marshall and everything else to Baruch. So he said, Rishon Kana, Marshall gets the house, Sheni Loy Kana. So, Seifa Loy Mishkachas Lo Eleb Kisha Amad, the Seifa is only possible if he gets better, and it's talking about where he did it haltingly. Said he's giving the house to Marshall. And then later he said, and everything else to Baruch. Right? So then if he gets better, Baruch doesn't get everything else, because that was giving away everything, and no man leaves himself giving away everything. What he gave to Marshall, just the house, that was there, he wasn't giving away everything, so even if he gets better, Marshall gets the house. So now the Gemara says, well, a few other laws about Shchiv Meirah. Ibayalu hikdish kol nechasav. If he gave away to hektish all his property, do we say that in this case, even if he gets better, he's happy to do it? Because it's such a mitzvah. V'amar, and he gets better, Mao, do we reverse it because no man leaves himself with nothing? Or maybe when he gives to hektish, he does. Mi amrina kol legabe hektish gamer umakne. When it's such a mitzvah like giving hektish, he gives it over even if he's going to get better. Oidilma kol legabe nafshe. When it to leave himself without anything, legamer umakne. He doesn't give it away. It's only because he was dying. Hifker kol nechasav ma. What if he was mafker all his estate? Now he'll say mafker all his estate. Who would do that if he's going to live? But maybe when you mafker all of your estate, it includes that a lot of poor people will come. Says the Gemara, Mi amrina kaven da'aflaniyim kashirim. He's mafker it to the poor too. Gamara makne, because he wants to do a lot of good deeds. Oidilma again, kol legabe nafshe lo gamara makne. He's not going to do that if he's leaving himself naked. What about if he said specifically for the poor? A clearly big mitzvah. Do we say, stuck of Ade Migma Gama Makne? He meant to do it even if he's going to get better. He doesn't give it away to leave himself poor. Take it.